Okay, cool. So Anant, we're here with another episode of Context Window. It seems like we're actually hopefully getting into a regular cadence of these things, and the last one was really good on with Roy as a guest talking about MCP, and now we've got some other good stuff to talk about today, right?
Absolutely. Today we'll talk about something that everybody is talking about, which is how is developer productivity and what developers do changing with AI. And I think that our listeners, hopefully it's greater than zero. I'm reminded of IBM has a big business in tape drives, and tapes are mostly write once and read never kind of thing. But hopefully there are people who are going to listen to this episode. So we have got an awesome guest out there, Neel, who's going to walk us through this. But before we do that, some news. I've got some news, but Ed, why don't you start?
Well, sure. A lot of interesting things. Obviously, the good news is that there's never any dearth of news in this space. So, I think probably one of the ones that was pretty exciting over the last week has been the open source models.
Yes.
The new open source models from OpenAI. They finally delivered on their namesake. Which I think is pretty interesting, and a lot of folks have been
open, not for profit AI. Absolutely,
yeah, exactly. So that's been pretty interesting, and a lot of folks that I know and have been digging into those and playing with them. I actually upgraded my graphics card this weekend to be able to handle the models. So that's been pretty exciting.
I've got a news for you. So IBM has its developer event called Tech Exchange, and I'm going to MC day 2 of it, which is kind of technology focused. So I thought, let us go and prognosticate about where AI is going. And who better to find out where AI is going than ask AI? Okay, so I went into all our favorite AI and said, what do the next 12 months look like? And honestly, what I got was fairly pedestrian stuff. Okay, we got, better enterprise features, fewer hallucinations, more multimodality. There was no mention of AGI. So at least either the responses have been cooked, or AI actually doesn't believe that AGI is coming anytime soon. But it's very good to hear that, because Ed and our job is, I think, secure till such time that AGI actually comes about. So I was really, really pleased with AI being incremental in terms of what it was promising in the next 12 months.
Well, I think that's just what they want you to think.
Okay. Oh my God. Game theory here, huh? Okay, very
exactly,
good.
Exactly.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yes.
Okay. Any other interesting thing? There was a New York Times article on, the standard sky's falling, jobs are disappearing for fresh grads. And my eyes basically roll over whenever I see that. But you've got some comments on that, and then I've got some comments.
Well, I do. And I think, it's too soon to tell, is long and short. I tend to be of the approach that, these concerns are valid, and we need to be thoughtful about them. I see all these scare stories as well. And look, the reality is we wouldn't be pursuing AI if there weren't productivity gains to be had, and productivity gains are about what we can achieve in terms of how much output can we achieve from an input of human labor, and if AI really works, then we will either be able to accomplish a lot more, or we'll be able to accomplish the same with less people, and those are choices and things that we'll figure out situationally. But I don't think we yet know the widespread implications. Obviously we all have familiar with the basics of history. So, and certainly for us working close to it, we see that a lot of this stuff ends up being 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and so then the questions about whether how real and how big these concerns are sometimes seem overblown to us, and legitimately so.
Awesome. And obviously, this will be a big topic with our guest when he comes on.
Yes.
So I wanted to move to kind of the last news that I keep hearing about, the one-person unicorn. Okay, and it's like sounds really, really wow, right? I think it's basically horse crap. Okay, because maybe one person can build an app, but is there any single app without some huge amount of server-side infrastructure that would deliver $1 billion of either market cap or $100 million of revenue to be classified as unicorn? So I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we are doing, or the world is doing, is to either overhype or underhype AI. And this is an example of where I would say we are overhyping AI.
I think that's true. I think that, first of all, there's, even pre-AI, there were lots of examples of leverage that startups were getting by moving faster, using things like cloud technology and so on. It already seems like a long time ago when WhatsApp was acquired and was a very small team. And we do see some of the acquisitions that are happening now, where in some cases, you see what happened with Windsurf and so on, where in many cases, it's the core team that is being acquired. So when we think about what's happening with with these startups and these $1 billion unicorns, or one-person unicorns, is it going to happen? It could. Is it realistic? Well, there only has to be one of them for it to be realistic.
Okay, right? Yeah, of course. Awesome. Okay, I will not like trading places, because that had a very interesting premise, but I'm going to put $100 on the table right now that in the next 5 years, $1 billion unicorn won't happen, or a single person unicorn won't happen. You'll take that on?
It's a good question, because
$100, man. That's it, man.
Yes, I'll put $100 down. Sure.
Okay, very good.
I mean, because again, you know why I take that bet? Because all you have to do is have one billionaire go and fire his whole team, which again, guessing the way some of them behave, doesn't seem that far fetched, actually.
Okay, I totally agree with you. Okay, hey, lots of fun again. Last time when I was there, I had these headsets on, and some smart aleck, great friend of mine, commented that, Anant, they make wireless headphones too. And maybe I'm a Luddite, maybe this thing works better, but I will continue to use these till enough people shame me into having that high-tech mechanism in your ears that you have, Ed. Okay, so let's talk about the topic today, which is developer productivity. So
yes.
So I mean, developer productivity is, as we discussed, very crudely mentioned in kind of lines of code. I don't know whether you saw, but there was somebody said, look, I've seen developers writing 10,000 lines of code per day. And while that all seems like bizarro land anyway, I think that just measuring developer productivity in K-logs, as we used to call in IBM, is completely wrong. Because in the end, a developer does a lot of things, and in the end, the measure really is, did the job that she wanted to do get done? Okay, and therefore there's a lot more to it than lines of code. But somehow everybody seems to be gravitating towards that as a singular metric.
Yeah. So I And lines of code is obviously not a real metric, or a metric that people should pursue for their own sake. So these are proxies, right? I mean, is it lines of code? Is it quality of code? Is it testability? There's certain, and there are plenty of software productivity metrics. Lines of code ends up being one that people like to throw out there. It'll never go away. You and I have been having this argument about developer productivity and lines of code, we haven't been on either side of it. I mean, you and I have been hearing this argument for many years, right? So yes, it's going to be something that keeps on happening.
For example, the recommendation of curly braces begin on the line kind of goes against my line of code measure. I wish that the standard default was curly braces going on the new line. Hey, so there are lots and lots of things to discuss. Maybe
yes.
It's best if we discuss it with our esteemed guest. So if we can let Neel in, it'll just be absolutely phenomenal. Hey, Neel. So I'll introduce you in a minute, and I've known you for a couple of decades. But let's begin first with just a question from you, question to you. Has AI made devs faster or just changed the type of work?
It's a good question. Probably it'll take me another 2 days to answer that question.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Yes.
But let me give you an answer. I think it has made them productive, but not in the way you think about it, right? So I think I was, you had at least one audience member, that was me in the first part. You were worried, are they going to be?
Oh, that's true. That is true. Absolutely. So it is read once, read once, at least. Absolutely.
Right. So I might be your flash drive, but anyways. So I think measuring productivity, first of all, measuring, it's kind of hiring a contractor and saying, I'm going to pay you by the number of nails you drill into the nail into the wall, right? You cannot, you're hiring them for the job. So lines of code or, number of PRs, et cetera, it's a very poor metric. Having said that, I think in the early days, we go back 2-3 years, CEOs, executives, the model providers had to come back and say something. It's like, okay, 30% was a new Pareto number. And I'll give you the history of 30, which is 30% of the code is written by AI. We need 30% less developers. Developers are 30% more productive. So if you're not in that 30% ballpark, you're not doing AI. That was kind of the metric. So I would talk to companies, executives, friends who are in positions like you as CTOs, et cetera, and they would all ask, how do I get to this? Give me some 30% answer. And that was a measure of productivity.
Wow.
Right? So we call it 80-20 rule. I think actually for AI, it's a 30-70 rule, which is the 30 is an important number. And so somehow everybody tried to get to that 30 number, right? If I work 30% less time, that's productive, right? So I think all these metrics are wrong. And as I have seen in my own journey in the last 10 years of developers using these tools, I think they are productive in very, very different ways. And I don't think we should measure productivity by the metrics we can. I mean, we measure things only because we can measure. So for example, if you have a roofer and who comes and puts in, you want to know the adequate number of nails there so that the roof will hold. But that's about it. Beyond that, it is, how well it is set, what are all the things that is layered underneath, et cetera, matters. So it's exactly the same thing. And the second thing is, I think when we measure these things, we think of developers as some kind of fungible elements, right? We can replace one with the other, et cetera. We need to treat developers as important parts, ingredients of the company, or important members of the company. In some sense, we need to respect them in ways because that's where the creativity comes. So I will be happy if the developers are more happy using AI, right?
Yes.
So if you're 30% more productive and still are grumpy, we are all known to be very grumpy people, right? We are all known to not make eye contact, and that has been the definition. So if more developers make eye contact, I think that would be a measure of productivity. So we need to kind of be creative. And as I have seen feedback, as I've seen developers using these AI tools in the communities that they are in, converse, I see a new kind of energy using AI in these tools. And that's what we want to see. And that's excitement. So in some sense, like they say, I don't know, there used to be an ad saying happy cows give better milk or whatever. So we want happy developers. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
so happiness is an important part. I know I sound like a yogi somewhere, but actually that's really an important part of the equation we should not forget.
The best developers should be in Bhutan then, okay? Which knows how to measure the happiness.
We have to be careful over measuring happiness, but yes.
Okay. Hey, absolutely awesome. So we'll get into a lot more of these discussions, but we thought that we'll just start by getting Neel's perspective before kind of a boring, look, Neel, how great you are and how lucky we are to have you. But I think it's time to actually get to how great you are and how lucky we are to have you, Neel. So Neel, why don't you talk a bit about your journey to IBM, helping IBM build better developer tools, and what brought you here and what have you learned on the way?
Sure. Good question. I think I have to go all the way back when I started right out of college. I know it might sound boring, but I think the biggest revelation to me happened right there. I was a math major mostly. I loved math, and I thought programming was a horrible job, very boring. I was lucky to be mentored by one Professor Kesav Nori. He was a former professor at IIT Kanpur, and he's probably the most brilliant person I've ever met in my life, and I was super lucky to be mentored by him. And two things he taught me. Number one, he said that every system that you build has an underlying language, and you need to build a compiler for that language. In fact, you need to generate the compiler for that language, and that will basically allow you to build a larger language. In some sense, build bootstrapping systems. The second thing he said, which was more important, was that programs should never be written. They should be generated. So when we talk about lines of code written, and this was long ago. I mean, you and I know we go a long way back. So I won't name the year. But
Ed also goes a long way back, but you and I know each other for a long time.
But that was kind of, nobody ever said that. So you used to say programmers should get paid well, but program generators could get paid even better. And in fact, you should not write program generators. You should write program generators. You should generate program generators. So today we have the famous Google paper saying attention is all that's required. 15 years ago when I worked at eBay, I used to say data is all that's required, and there's some great work from people at Google also saying, if you have enough data, we can produce great algorithms. And we are seeing more of that in the AI world. And then back then we used to say grammar is all that's required, because most of the software jobs are migrating from one thing to another, right? So they're all compiler jobs, right? I'm trained as a compiler person. So if I have a grammar, I don't have to, if I have a source grammar and a target grammar, I do not have to write code. I just need to match them up. I need to map them. And 90% of the programming jobs are of that kind. 90% of the software jobs are of that kind. Unfortunately, we hire more and more engineers because we have built these systems that are not built that way. So most of the time, we are just patching existing system built by humans. So in some sense, generation is a part of what makes computer science a beautiful thing, right? This was pre-AI. And I have a real story to tell as well related to that. So when I was an intern back in India, there was a giant project from a big consulting company that this research center was a part of. And they needed a huge migration project from some complex modular-based language to C++. And they had quoted 10, those days they used to call them man years, or 100 man years and 10 developers or 10 years or whatever, right, to do it by hand. And Professor Nori was like, do you see this guy? And I was barely out of college, and says, he can do it in 4 weeks, and he'll write a compiler for it. And he won't write a compiler for it. He will generate a compiler for it. He won't generate a compiler for it. He will generate the generator of the compiler for it. And then he looked at me and said, will you do it? And I was naive, scared. I didn't know how to say no. I said, yes, of course. And it didn't take 4 weeks. It took probably 3 months. Yeah. It didn't take one person, it took 2 people, and so on. But the point is, the way that contract was written was $79,000 to write the tool and 25 cents per line of code translated. And and the company made a ton of money. Of course, I got paid equivalent of $100, but that's a different story.
Of course.
And it goes back to your point about where do I put the curly braces, right? Because if I put the curly braces Johnson style, the braces come on their own line, that'll cost you 25 cents. So there was an argument with our customer or the client saying, where should the curly braces be?
Oh my God, seriously?
So they had to they had to change their coding standards so that they could save money. See, human beings are amazing. Right?
Oh, also does a single line if require curly braces or not? That would be another.
So I had to write a separate tool called NCSS, which is called non-commented source code statement. So they would not pay for comments.
Oh, this is awesome, man.
So anyway, so I'm not really surprised by what we are seeing today. In some sense, I think as computer scientists, we just take old wine and put in new bottles and call it new. And that's kind of what it is, right? So we reinvent things over and over again with new names and new contexts. And, and this is one of those moments where it's not grammar, it's not data, it's, attention and models is what we require, right? So we've come that far. And of course, I think if you look at automation now, the grammar part, the data part, and the algorithm part are all coming together. And that's why we are seeing this huge jump in the way, we are seeing productivity gains, right?
Awesome. Ed, what should we ask Neel? Because I've got a couple of questions.
Oh, by the way, I have to tell you that wired headphone is a great idea.
I totally agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
If you want to see the best Apple ads, I'll share with you later on. Go and look at it. They're all with wired headphones, not with the ones which are, the one that Ed is wearing.
That's because they're coming. The kids like the wired headphones now.
I was telling you that. There's a great article in New York Times about it. Yes.
Exactly.
But the difference is Anant and Neel are in South Bay and Ed is in San Francisco. So at least he's trying to be cooler.
I am. But emphasis on trying. So. I think it is really interesting to go and see sort of how the approaches measuring productivity and so on have changed. We obviously are still dealing with the sort of paradigmatic switch changes that have happened with coding over the last couple of years. And Neel, you've been working pretty deeply in that. I think we probably should have emphasized that at the beginning. And so as we grapple with this stuff, there's been a tremendous explosion of obviously a lot of things that we're all very familiar with in terms of the various coding models and the tooling around it. But let's talk a little bit about what you've been seeing. This is an area that for people that are meeting you via this and learning on this may not appreciate how that you've actually been working in the tooling and coding space for some time now, and you've been applying that to AI development for some time now as well.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about where it all started. I mean, it started way before OpenAI. In some sense, prior to me joining Microsoft about 11 years ago, I was doing a lot of data work. I'm trained as a compiler person, but I think that's one thing I would encourage everybody to do. Train in something and go to something else, because you bring in this new kind of IQ into this new space.
LR1, LRK, I can't say anything beyond
exactly.
that.
So we used to
or LALR,
yes. grammars,
LALR,
and
exactly.
Is it parsable? Is it generatable? There's a whole. We can do an episode on just grammars, right? But anyways, but the thing was, I was doing a ton of data work, and then when I joined Microsoft, I wouldn't tell the story of me joining Microsoft, but the point was that they said, well, we want somebody with data skills, and looks like you're a data guy. And it's great to be in a place where nobody looks at data and you're the only one. It's also a risky place because everybody thinks you're speaking a language that nobody understands. So my first realization was that, we have tons and tons of code, and why not look at code as data, literally? So that was my first pitch. And actually an idea for, so we would do significant analysis. We would crawl GitHub those days. We didn't have GitHub. And we would do analysis of code to see what kind of programming languages they code in, what kind of structures they have. We would produce these high-level code smell metrics, et cetera, et cetera. And then one of the scientists in my team, he had the idea that, we were also analyzing what is the nature of code. So for example, you see that 30% of code is API calls. So, and any of you, both of you are coders, so you will know this. Most of the time when you make an API call, you're trying to see what is the right function to call given a class name or an object name. And
Neel,
then what
you
are
don't
the
know,
parameters
both of
to
us
call?
are actually API programmers.
Yeah, there you go. So you will appreciate, yeah.
Yes.
So as more and more coding is library-based, package-based, most of the time you're calling something, and then you want to know, like, think about string dot, and then you got like 55,000 functions to call. Which one should I call? And if you look at most editors, they're sorting them alphabetically.
Yes.
And developers are wasting a lot of time. So there's this idea that somebody said, oh, what if we make it better? And that was really the first pitch I had for, we didn't even call it developer productivity, even though that was kind of the mission of the organization. It's like, wouldn't it be cool to do that? So then we looked at code and said, well, what is, in fact, I gave a talk back in 2017 called Teaching Machines to Code. So if a recommender system can be built when the developer is writing code to automatically recommend the API call. So now you're building a recommender system, which is very different from the Amazon recommender system or eBay recommender system where you bought this and you bought that. A shopping mode is very different from developer mode. A developer mode is a grumpy mode, it's an analytical mode, etc. So when you interfere with the developer's mental flow, you got to be very, very careful. Now, and then how do we model programs? We just, these are kind of Markov functions, right? So we kind of say, hey, all we need is a Markov chain model. We don't really need anything fancy, right? We didn't have LLMs then. We had some feature-based machine learning, which we used to do a lot, but that didn't work here. So for example, if you say, create a file object of read type, the next thing you will open it as a read file, then you will start reading from it. So there's a chain of occurrence. So when I recommend after you open the file, I'm going to recommend a read operation, then a write operation, right? So stuff like that. So by understanding, then we also say, hey, if it's inside the loop, it's inside the function, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really a custom-built model that would do kind of what we call today line completion. Because now if I can do 30%, again, coming back to your 30% question, 30% of the code, if I can make good recommendations, that will be good. And it was hard to put it out there because most people don't believe, AI wasn't even a word then. I've had executive conversations in the company where it was like, what is this? Does it even work? Right? We got an opportunity to put it out there. And anybody who's done machine learning would know, or even if you look at today the AI space, every model, the next model comes is you got to be 10% better than the previous model. That's the space you are in.
30%.
Huh? No, you're 10% better than the previs model, right?
Okay,
so,
I'm just kidding.
And we're always in the accuracy numbers of 90%, 92%, 93%, and so on. But here, when we did an offline testing, it was like 70% good, which means 7 out of 10 recommendations were correct. And when we put it out to test, we had a few thousand developers. It was less than 50% correct. A traditional machine learning team would just say, okay, shut it down, don't do it. Then we look at the bulletin boards of developers, and they were like, wow, this is an amazing tool. Where were you hiding all these years? Why wouldn't you put it out there for us? So this is the first time where online metrics is worse than offline metric, and the developer feedback, user feedback is much better than your metric. It never ever happens. Usually it goes down. Offline is better than online, and then online is better than the actual qualitative feedback. Here it was reversed. And so we knew we were onto something else. So if you look at the first generation of line completion, it was based upon a very simple model. Because, of course, the tool we are sitting on top of, right, these VS Codes, the VS editor space, the canvas on which we put it, they have huge constraints on us. They're saying you're not going to bring in some random machine learning algorithm into our tool and say it works. It has to fit in the client box because these are all customers. They won't send the data over to the cloud. So it has to work on the client, which means the model has to be less than 30 megabytes. It has to have an SLA of 10 milliseconds. That's the kind of constraints they give. So suddenly we are solving other problems of shrinking the model in some clever ways so that, it makes a recommendation at the right time. But, sometimes when you starve, you learn, the value of food. It's just kind of like that. So we didn't have these 10,000 GPU farms where we could run train gazillion lines of code. We were actually doing some real work to make it work.
That's what they said about DeepSeek, right? They said DeepSeek came about because they were starved.
Right, exactly. So starvation is, I wouldn't recommend starvation, but let's call it fasting is not a bad thing after all, right? But the point being that, and then at that time, then we started improving the model because one of the problems these is that as you import more and more packages, there's more information carried, which means the models are going to get bigger with the data, and which means you're not going to fit in the client side, right? So we came up with the first deep learning model, which was an LSTM-based model, right? And right around that time, I read this paper, and then that was also hitting the limits. And right around that time, I came around this paper from the Attention is All That You Need to Protect. It hit me saying, oh, this is something that can really help us. At that time, my friends were joking with me saying, why are you working on this? Why don't you go work on images or video or something like that? Coding is such a boring thing.
Label the dogs and then find the dog.
Yes.
Right, exactly. So I was, and that's why I went around giving the talk saying, teaching machines to code. And the Internet of Code and stuff like that. And people are like, what the heck is he talking about? But the point is that we saw huge value in using, an LLM. That was the first LLM that came out of it. But if you go back then, the model that went into production was less than a billion parameter model. And developers were happy with line completion. And in fact, we went from API calls to API calls with the right parameters to CLI where, you got a bunch of shell commands, but they have got 64 parameters that you have to get it right. And
dash.
Right, exactly. So there's a space of goodness that you can create for developers to be productive and be happy. And that's what we went with. And this was before OpenAI came along. And of course, you know the story when OpenAI came along, what happened, right? But I think we proved that with less than a billion parameters, and of course we had to play a ton with architectures of the LLMs, right? So we had to have a decoder model. We had for one thing, we had to have an encoder model for another thing. We have an encoder-decoder model. We had an encoder-decoder model, and so on and so forth. So when you have less data, less parameters, you have to kind of lay it out in such a way that you can balance it for the right model architecture for the right task, right? And then after that, basically this whole promise of AGI came along saying, who cares? Just throw a lot of data at it, a lot of GPUs at it, and a lot of network layers at it, and let it train for weeks, and you'll have something that's intelligent enough, right? So
yeah. Hey, Neel, on that comment, so you have always impressed on me that look, almost all jobs require an ensemble of models, because while you could have Mr. or Ms. Know-it-all, in practical reality, it doesn't quite work. And that's been a phenomenal thing. So today there was a Hard Fork podcast, and the Hard Fork podcast was talking about Alexa. And Alexa actually has about 70 models behind it. And their primary thing that they do is actually route to the correct model. Now, of course, they get it wrong sometimes, et cetera, et cetera. But this concept of, look, future excellent applications will be built on an ensemble of models is exemplified by all the kind of the IDEs and other things that you're talking about. But I think it's generally going to be true across the board.
And that's actually part of ChatGPT 5 is actually one of the new components of it is that there is model routing happening behind the scenes. There's been a lot of discussion about that lately over the last couple of days about the model routing, because they actually downshift to different versions of the model depending on the complexity of the question, and they're doing that as a form of cost management.
I would like to add one point to that. So one thing. It came to my realization early on, when we have such low goodness, like 30%, let's go with the 30% number, I think the rest of the burden comes on the tools. So there are three things that played to make for a great tooling system. Today, we haven't had internal conversation, and all of us is like, oh, I want Claude because, the other model sucks. And I want the world's best model, irrespective of what it costs. So that's only 1/3 of the story, right? What is the architecture in which you deploy that model? SLAs are really important, right? How the handshake happens between the client and the inference stack is important. There's a whole bunch of things that are important. You can't just say, I'm going to turn on cloud and magic is going to happen.
How do you deliver the right context to it, for example?
And the third thing is user experience, because we are talking about developers. If we're talking about developers, they are in a deep analytical state when they're building systems. So when you interfere with them, right? We have to be very careful how we do it. So a ton of innovations come in the user experience. In fact, if you're a designer, if you're a user experience person, this is golden time for you, because you have to augment AI with an amazing experience. And when we built IntelliCode and then later Copilot, we did a ton of experiments, even when to recommend the completion. Right? Because you as a developer, you're typing code in, you might delete it, you might go back, you might do a whole bunch of stuff. If I bombard you with recommendations when you're not willing to accept it, or if I go wrong 5 out of 6 times, that you're going to stop trusting me. So there is a lot of cleverness that's involved in how you interfere. Do I give you 3 choices? You pick one. That requires an extra click. Do I just complete it for you? Do I ghost it? And so on and so forth. So there's a ton of things that happens in the user experience that's important, that's going to make it look great. And that's why when you have a machine that's just about good enough and is not giving those 90-95% we are used to traditional models, there's a ton of work to be done outside of it. And all of these 3 things come together: a great engineering system, great user experience, and a great model that provides SLA that you want is really important. So in all of the tools that we have built, whether it's a mixture of models, I can give you many, many examples of where the top model is not the one that's required, because we have other requirements of these models, right? If I ask you a simple question, what's your name? You don't need to go into a thinking mode, right? Mm-hmm. You need to give an answer right away. But if I ask you about poverty and economy, you might go into a thinking mode. Yeah. So
system 1, system 2 thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Hey, we have a couple of more questions for you, and then I've got a thing that hopefully it will stump you. But Ed, we've been talking a lot about cost. You have kind of forwarded the kilo thing. So why don't we kind of have a bit of a discussion on this? All fantastic. And Neel, thank you so much for building such wonderful things. But if it drains my pocket or the organization that I'm in, is it really worth it? So Ed, why don't we have a bit of a conversation on that?
I think it's one of the interesting facets of it. It's been one of the things that you and I have observed and have talked about before, which is that one of the important things that's changed in the coding process now is that the token consumption is a constant cost. The developer who's using one of these systems is basically developing on the meter, which is something people aren't necessarily used to. And my thoughts on it are these are real costs. It is going to change the economics and budgeting. People aren't going to like that. They're going to have to adjust their thinking, because there's lots of things people don't like about it. But it does seem like it does seem like it is an important factor that people are going to have to be thinking about. And Anant alluded to the Kilo Code article, which I thought was a really good one in terms of calling this out. And one of the things I observed when I spent time with a lot of the developer tools and Cursor and so on, and a lot of the value people got out of these was that they were doing it because they were trying to optimize their token consumption, and obviously get the most bang for the buck in terms of what they spend. So Neel, you've been looking at this, token consumption is a very real thing. I mean, quite frankly, at least my observation is that probably the GitHub Copilot may have handicapped itself by trying to go in and be a $20 a month, price point going in, because a lot of developers, myself included, said, I'd rather have the best code I can get and pay as I need to for it than just try to constrain my cost to $20 and give me the best model that I can get for $20. What are your thoughts on that? You've been very close to this problem.
Yeah, I remember some years ago, one of my friends who lives in the Bay Area, when I was visiting from Washington, said, "You guys charge only $20 a month. I'm running this startup, and 80% of my developers use it. We are seeing amazing value. At that time, all we had was line completion. And tell me that you're going to jack up the price sometime. And so you're right that, you can think of it as a freemium model, get you sucked in, later on charge more for you, et cetera, et cetera. But also you see that the way developers are using it is growing by leaps and bounds. So if I set a price today and if I come out with a model like 6 months from now, the model's going to be able to do a lot more, and you buy a 1-year subscription, so I'm going to lose money on it. The other reason for pricing it that way is that also to say that generally the inference cost is dropping, the model costs are dropping, et cetera. So you could get more tokens for a cheaper price. So in which case, if I get you in for $20 a month, maybe it's actually, today it costs me $30, maybe next year it will cost me only $10. So there are all these, the market is not mature yet. In some sense, I can't buy an insurance policy on this to say, right? So it's still being developed, right?
Exactly.
So that's why I wouldn't worry too much about the pricing. But having said that, there's a ton of work tool builders have to do to, reduce that. In fact, there are other things, right? So there is one story I read which talks about there's a ton of no money to be made during training time, ton of money to be made in inference time. So if I charge you 10x on output tokens over input tokens, I can bombard you with an essay for a simple question that you asked and charge an arm and a leg, unless you tell me, be concise, give me an answer in one line. So this market is it's still a flea market, right? It's not a standardized market. So I think we should let that develop over time, right? So that's number one. So because of that, we need to make sure as tool builders that we optimize the heck out of these things, right? We cache tokens, we do cache prompts, we do a whole bunch of things in the tools that we build, where we can take a $100 cost, again, coming back to my 30 number, we can reduce to $30, right? We do that today. So when we deploy these systems over AWS might tell us, oh, this cost you $100. One of the things I noticed that developers are worried about budget. Right? They just say, oh my God, this PR cost me $10, right? Maybe I shouldn't submit it because they're going to take it away from me when I exceed the budget, right? So there is this thing that when you tell people how much it costs, but they won't blink twice before asking for another developer to help them, which would cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Yes. So, but when a task that takes 20 minutes, if it does 2 days worth of work, costs you $10, you kind of say, damn it, that's $10. It's like clipping coupons while paying, 100,000, 500,000 over asking price for a house, right? People are clipping coupons.
No, and I love that. I love that analogy. I think that the issue is that people don't think very strategically about their development costs. We know this, but they're also still learning how to use these tools. One of the interesting things is that your point of saying, "Oh, I need another developer," but then we start getting into the issues of, oh, well, how long is it going to be before that developer is productive, and mythical man month stuff, and all of these pieces. Oh, I can't accelerate it. Whereas, when these tools work, and of course, look, I and everybody else have plenty of examples of when they don't, right? So you immediately, whenever I make these statements, I immediately get all of the hands going up saying, oh, no, it did this and it did that and it hallucinated and whatever. But we also have an equal number of stories, which is why we're pursuing these things, of when it all does come together. And when it does come together, you're able to bring not just one developer, but essentially a team of developers on demand who, with the tools that you and others are building, are able to arrive on the scene, understand the code base immediately, because a lot of what is done with the tool space is the context management, and context management is essentially a big part of it is how can I take that code base and take what's important in it and feed that into the context. And now it's suddenly, how do I end up going and having a dozen engineers on the project now at crunch time to solve this thing, and it makes the difference. But that opportunity cost is hard to calculate. And we have a lot of development, of course, that's happening from people who, where the expenses are viewed as more sort of linear cost basis things.
Awesome points. So Neel, we are about running out of time, but there are two things. One is I wanted to give you my view of using these tools. So outside work, and my wife doesn't quite like it, but I spend a lot of time, or I at least enjoy solving cryptic crosswords, and British style cryptic crosswords. So one of the things I want to do is to program in Golang, because I'm kind of okay in Golang, but the language doesn't matter, building a cryptic crosswords. And therefore I say there are 3 steps to it. One step is build a grid. Second step is fill it with words. And third is write clues. And I'm basically stuck on the first one. Okay. I have tried with an IDE, not yours, Neel. I've tried it with a very fancy, oh my God, this is the best coding model out there. And I'm failing miserably. Okay. So what's going on? Is it that these models can do routine tasks, but intellectual tasks such as what Anant might throw at them kind of stump them?
I think, it depends on how you look at it. So for example, when we incorporate in our tools, when we incorporate new models, the first test we give to these models is write a Tetris program. And it's really interesting. It tells us how the model thinks, right? I mean, Tetris is not cryptic crossword. I love doing cryptic crossword as well. In fact, that's one thing that Professor Nori had taught me back when I started. He would say, when you come into work in the morning, you should solve the crosswords, not start coding. That was his requirement. So hats off to you for doing cryptic crossword. So it tells you, right? For example, does it bring you the right four tile shapes?
Yes.
Does it put it in the right place, etc.? And there are a lot of parallels to cryptic crossword. So are you trying to solve the cryptic crossword all the way from end to end? So for example, if you take crosswords, the British cryptic crosswords, most of them, they have a pattern of symmetry,
yes,
right? And in some sense, there are only so many patterns.
Yes.
Why do I need to discover those patterns? I could just have a database of those patterns and completely eliminate that steps. And in fact, we used to write cryptic crosswords, and that's exactly what we'd do. We would have a blank sheet of patterns, and we would start filling in. Now, the second step is basically creating words that go, and they're constrained. So this is kind of like a constraint. It's not a pattern matching problem. It's a constraint programming problem. And LLMs are not great at that. But you could massage it in some ways to say, hey, here is a dictionary of word, and here are the constraints I'm going to give you. Now that I have a pattern shape, I can do some of that stuff.
So Neel, what you're saying is there is hope.
Oh, there is hope. And you may not get 100% automation, but there is a part of, because we used to even write cryptic crosswords, so there is a part of it which is mundane.
I will add you to my Git repo, and let's see whether we can collectively prove out that your hope is warranted.
Right.
So,
I think of cryptic crossword as very pure things. They're like temples. So maybe we should solve them, then not try to create them. But yes.
Okay. Okay. Hey, listen. We have got to bid you goodbye, Neel. But it's been phenomenal, and I know that Neel, while you're working on some awesome things that you'd like to kind of come back and talk to us. So we want to extend a welcome to you.
Thank you.
Sometime in the near future. And I've been reading some of the stories of how developers who are curmudgeonly absolutely loving what you're doing. So we'll just love to kind of hear that back from you. But otherwise, it's just been a fascinating discussion, Neel. And it's an absolute pleasure to both have you on this podcast, but also get a chance to work with you. So thank you very much. Ed, any last words?
Yeah, definitely look forward to having you back again. This was a great conversation. So I'm very excited to see, what comes out of the work that you're doing in this space. It's it sounds like there's still some great innovations to be delivered in this.
Thank you. And thank you for your sense of humor. It's like the car talk show or the code talk show. So maybe you should close it with "Don't code like my brother."
Yeah, don't code. Exactly. By the way, Ed is a Lua fan. I know Ed helped us earn $70,000 where over a weekend he wrote a Lua program in Nginx, I think.
Yeah, well, that was back in
Yes,
the
that
day.
was-
I
that
wanted to, from a
was,
language standpoint,
so-
actually, I had another interesting thing where which is we're actually, uh, I'm one of the few people who can say that they've been programming Java for 30 years as of this year. So
Fantastic.
I'm pretty excited about that fact.
But by the way, Ed, they say that there are only two kinds of programming languages. Okay.
Yes.
You know this, right? There are programming either the programming languages that you hate or programming languages that you have not used. Okay. So
Yes.
so
that's why don't write code, generate code. I'll leave you
yes,
with
don't
that.
write code. That's exactly right. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome, Neel. Thank you so much.
Thank
you. Okay, that was a fascinating discussion. It was
Yes.
a phenomenal breadth and depth deep dive. And for our listeners, hopefully greater than one, we do want to tell you that we want to kind of maintain this format. And next week, we'll have a guest who will talk about what are the boundaries of human-computer interactions. For those of you who have been following how the old world of cybernetics has talked about intelligence amplification and what's the boundary between humans and machines. In this new world, as agents become more and more powerful, what does it mean for that interface? What does that mean for that boundary? We'll have another expert out there. But we want to kind of conclude this particular session, Ed, with some parting words.
Yeah. I think this is one of these topics, AI assisted coding that we're going to come back to quite a bit. And I think we have a lot of interesting pieces to this. I think that I think the cost piece, a lot of people are going to struggle with. The reason why I zoom in on that is because I typically, when I look at the adoption of a new technology, I look at the pieces of it that people sort of have the most cognitive dissonance with. And I think cost is the one that people sort of struggle with and then they skip past. And then obviously, as we get that into people's hands, that's the first thing that somebody who's a user or customer actually hits with. And so that's where I think you get this sort of market.
I want to kind of end a bit on is that even though I do a bit less of development than I should, when I was kind of full-time developer, coding was actually fun, and having AI assist you with coding is fun. But the amount of time that I spent on kind of non-coding tasks was just astoundingly large. Maybe it was a function of larger companies that I was in, but there would be status reports, there would be docs, there will be there'll be design reviews, right? And there'll be meetings that I was not sure I wanted to attend, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel again, to come back to kind of the 30% thing, there may be some Amdahl's law at work here that if I'm only coding 30% of the time and I can accelerate it, let's say by whatever fraction it is, I'm still only accelerating the 30% and the rest of 70% still remains. So I wish some people who are working in AI actually take away some of the other things that I enjoy far less than I enjoy coding.
I think we're going to definitely see that. I mean, if you look at it, for a long time, it wasn't the tool makers, the compiler makers, the IDE makers who made the most money. It was obviously folks like Atlassian, Jira, love it or hate it, but it was all of the process stuff around development where a lot of the activity and value, at least for companies, were ended up happening. And so, I do think that the project management, the project tracking, the documentation, the status reports, and all of that, I think that's going to happen very, very soon. Lots of people have had that observation. I'm surprised that the tools in that area are not as mature, because it seems like a fantastic opportunity, low-hanging fruit. And yes, if people actually were able to spend 90% of their time coding versus the discussion and the planning and so on around that would also be a lot more enjoyable for developer quality of life.
Awesome. Hey, another, we think, fantastic episode. We don't know what our readers think, but we've been remiss in the last 4 or 5 shows that we've done, Ed. in not thanking the people who actually really make this extremely smooth. So we wanted to kind of thank three people here. So Ed, why don't you go ahead
Well,
and speak about them?
yes, yes. Well, a lot of the folks the folks that make this possible which are Milan Higginbottom and Hannah Press, who do all of the work as our producers in making this fine show happen.
And then Lauren Gold, who kind of
Yes, of course.
runs all the mechanics associated with this. So I'm reminded again, since Car Talk was mentioned, in Car Talk, they make fun of their Russian chauffeurs, but this time we are being really, really sincere in thanking Milan, Hannah, and Lauren, and we hope to keep this continuing. And with that, we will end this show.